everyone, and welcome to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Eccleston, aka the Neurodiverse Teacher. And today, my guest is Russell Vann. Russell was born in the South Bronx in the late 60s to a drug addicted mother and an absent father. Russell was raised by his great grandmother and faced life or death situations daily. Not only has Russell had to work to overcome his own specters, but also those that his daily environment provided to him. Russell is the author of a series of books titled Ghetto Bastard. The book served as a form of therapy and led to Russell's realization that all the people around him and throughout his life had been dealing with their own misfortunes. It is through his writings that Russell works to convey the messages that no matter your current situation, it does not define your final destination. And before we get started, I do want to let my listening audience know that there is the potential for the discussion of topics related to drug addiction, violence, and environmental hardship. Please be advised that any of those topics may be a trigger for you. Now, without further ado, I want to officially welcome Russell to the show. Thank you so much, Russell, for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I have to tell my listening audience that you and I actually got to meet each other, not in person, but virtually, because we were on a podcast together. And I was just so amazed by your story and what you have been through in your life. And I was hoping that you wouldn't mind just getting started with letting people know a little bit about you, what you have been through, and then kind of how that has led to writing your series of books called Ghetto Bastard.
Yes, like I said, thank you for having me, and I feel valued that you've let me have your presence. So, I was born in the South Bronx, Mott Haven section of the South Bronx, in 1968. It was the epitome of the heroin epidemic. It's right across the bridge from Harlem. And it's about 2-3 miles of projects. My mother was a teenager when I was born. She wasn't drug addicted as much as she was a drug user, but I guess you would say if someone is using drugs while they're pregnant, you must be addicted to it because you can't stop during that pregnancy. So, because I would hear her speak about how much drugs she used to intake while she was pregnant with me when she was talking with other people. But anyway, so I was born in the South Bronx, Mott Haven section. My mother and father were teenagers. My father was a what you call hustler, but he was also a basketball star in Queens. My mother was from the Bronx. My father was from Queens, and I guess she met him at a pool party, but she already had another boyfriend. And they hooked up, and she got pregnant. Didn't know who the father was per se, if it was me, I mean, if it was the other gentleman who she named me after, or my father. Plus, she was a teenager. She was having issues with her mother, because her mother was a young woman also, probably in her 30s at the time, maybe her late 30s. And so at some point through all of that, I was abandoned. My earliest recollection, which that's where my book starts, I go from my youngest memory, is being disciplined for urinating in the bed by these people that had taken me in. And I didn't know exactly who they were at the time. The book explains who they were, but my mother had farmed me out to people. I guess in that time, people took care of other people's children for a little, so I ended up with that. So that was abusive, to say the least. A lot of times when children are not your own and in those circumstances, it was an abusive environment, just say. I was ultimately saved from that environment when I was about 4 years old by my great grandmother. So this was actually my grandfather's mother.
Wow.
Right. And a lot of times when I say to people that I was raised by my great grandmother, the dynamics of me saying that I was raised by my great grandmother says a lot within itself.
Yeah.
That how many layers that child went through that they didn't want him, to the point that your great grandmother had to. But oddly enough, in the ghetto, in the community where I come from, that's not an oddity. So I don't want to sit here and get the the sympathy vote there, because there's a lot of people, a lot of ghetto bastards out there who are raised in that scenario, who are raised by their great grandmothers. So that happens in there. But anyway, it was kind of a blessing because she taught me old school values, old school moral values. So growing up, even though I was in the ghetto and I was surrounded by a lot of nefarious entities, should I say, I still had that moral integrity ingrained inside of me, that old school family moral integrity. So you can understand the kind of old school moral value integrities that this woman had to take a 4-year-old at her age, because she was probably about 60 at the time. She was taking care of her elderly mother, and she had a full-time job as a waitress. So those sacrifices and things like those are the things that she instilled in me. So now I say that because in my book and life itself and being from the ghetto, you're going to run into a lot of negative things, should I say, for lack of better words. And it's not that I was immune from running into these things, but what happened was that because I had that moral integrity installed in me, my judgments were a little different. They weren't an extreme. And I thank God and my grandmother, because I understand it's looking at today's society, because it's one of the things that we were talking about earlier. One of the big issues, one of the biggest destructive mechanisms in the ghetto and in society itself, because I'm not going to keep just saying the ghetto, is fatherless children.
Yeah.
No one to set the example. So growing up in the ghetto, luckily, I had the moral integrity that was instilled inside of me, but I still had to face the street and I still had to make those mistakes, and I didn't have any guidance. And unfortunately for a lot of other people that's ended up in different situations, if there's no role model, there's a trial and error when you're going through life. But when you're going through life in the ghetto, the trial and error, you could be dead or in jail.
Yeah.
So, fortunately, those things came into play. Another good fortune that came my way was that I met my wife when I was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So she kept me grounded a little bit too. A lot of mistakes along the way, you can imagine, from 15 to 50. But she put up with a lot and guided me too. So the book also, it's about a love story, but that was a positive interjection in my life, because there was always someone there in my corner. And growing up, being abused, being abandoned, to have someone in your corner who loved you, that you felt loved you, and things like that, that made a huge difference too. Kept me out of a lot of trouble and different things like that. Anyway, ended up dropping out of high school, went to a job training program, took up that trade. It was installing windows. Ended up opening up a small company of my own. And eventually, life happens, different things goes on. And I needed some therapy, should we say, because a lot of times we think that because we don't boo-hoo about the past, that it doesn't affect us, but it absolutely affects us. It absolutely affects us every single day. So I ended up getting some therapy, and in that therapy, a topic came up and said, "Write a book. You should write a book." After I said everything, the therapist had his mouth open. He said, "Man, you need to write a book." And you know how sometimes people say 1,000 things to you. Like, I went to him for about a year. He said 1,000 things to me, but only a couple of things resonated, and that was it. You need to write a book. So I ended up starting writing a book, and it was therapy. A lot of things came out. But then as we started publicizing the book, marketing the book, going to the book fairs and speaking to the different people and getting reviews on the book, I started to understand, because when you're not out there, when you're from where I'm from, that's your world, but you don't understand that just because you're living it doesn't mean other people aren't experiencing it. And just because I was in the ghetto, but I was having human emotions, human trials and tribulations. They weren't just attributes of the ghetto. What it was is I was living a human life, but I had that wall. I had to deal with those nefarious things also, and that's the difference. Like with the ghetto, and I wanted people to understand that when I started reading, writing the book, and I wanted other people to understand. There's a lot of ghetto bastards out there. And sometimes people get a little stunned by the word, but it's meant to be stunning. It's meant to be sensational because being a ghetto bastard is serious business. And there's a lot more ghetto bastards than people want to acknowledge. And what happens is we don't become an individual, we become a statistic.
Yeah.
And what I wanted my books to do was humanize people from the ghetto, not just that stuff you see on TV, not just the negative connotations that are associated with the word ghetto. There's a lot of bastards out there too, but unfortunately, they're not called bastards. It's all depending on your economic status.
Very true.
When you're rich, it's a love child. When you're poor in the ghetto, on welfare, in the projects, or in trailer parks, you're a bastard. That's your little bastard kids. And a lot of children today also, as in my time and in between, have been raised under that status. And a lot of them are in jail, are dead right now.
And I feel like you have, if I remember correctly, you really attribute your grandmother, your great grandmother, to really being that person that kind of helped keep you from that life. Because from what I recall, you were exposed to a lot of things. You had exposure to family members and just people in your community. But it was those values of your grandmother that really helped you kind of steer clear of going down that same path, if I remember correctly. Is that true?
That's true. And God, let's put God first and all that, because no matter what she did, she wasn't able to protect me from those outside entities, because a lot of times the outside entities were people in the family. And you can't be around your children, your great grandmother 24 hours a day. And you're supposed to trust your uncle. You're supposed to trust the mother. You're supposed to trust the grandparents. She came from old school values where people, respected children. People respected, they didn't do things around children. Sometimes they didn't smoke around children. Hey, go in the other room. Children had their place. The parents had their place. Things respected. My grandmother respected me, but everybody else, I was like a piece of furniture. They did everything around me, incorporated me into a lot of things also. And then that's what you learn. And then you become mixed because my grandmother's teaching me these moral integrity things, but I'm sitting out here looking at life and I'm seeing the drug dealers, I'm seeing the numbers runners, I'm seeing the people cursing, I'm seeing the people use drugs, I'm seeing these movies where it's sex, drugs, and violence and so-called black masculinity, which was the black exploitation films. So I'm seeing that on the outside, but on the inside, and hate the white man and hello, you still here? Because I don't see myself moving. And anti-white man and stuff like that. But in my house where I lived, it wasn't like that. My grandmother was black, dark as my bed. No, a little lighter. She wasn't that dark. But I never heard word of racism out of her mouth. Never. But her mother was so light, almost passed for white. And her two children were half white. My grandfather was half white, half Sicilian. So I didn't grow up with that, and when you're younger, you're listening to what's going on around you. So I didn't grow up hearing racism. I didn't hear growing up talking about white people or saying bad things about white people. Now, she took me to the movies. I don't know, that was a great idea, but those movies were like that. But, but then you go out in the street, you go around your family members, and they're all of that stuff. So then you have to have a balance and something to deflect that. What's going on, and something to say, oh, that's not true. So there were a lot of negative influence. Thank God I overcame them, because a lot of times I work in a jail now, and a lot of times I sit back and I look at the youth that are in there, a lot of young people in jail, and I say, if not for the grace of God, there go I. But it's not only for the grace of God, it's also for the grace of my nana, because like I said, God takes to the environment, but you still have to have those free will and that those moral integrity choices that you have to make that have you end up where you are in life. Did I answer all your questions?
No, you did. And I have to say that is one of the things that I find so fascinating about your story, because I feel like you were exposed to so many things where it would have been very understandable to say, this is what it is, or this is how my life is, or this is, I'm going to go down this path instead. I feel like it would have been very normal to say, yeah, I understand why Russell is angry or bitter or mad, and this is the life decisions he's made. But it's like you had all these obstacles and all these hurdles, but you never once saw them as something that was going to stop you from being able to take that next step. And I'm curious, I want to get into your mind a little bit about, what do you think it is about you personally that you had all these challenges in your life, but you never once said, well, I guess this is it. This is my life. This is what you were always able to kind of overcome and say, I can do better. This doesn't define me. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to keep pushing and keep developing and keep being successful. And what do you think it is that about you, or what you experienced, that made you be able to have that kind of mindset?
That's a good question. Long one too.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No. I like that. You get my mind going. I like people that make me think. Well, listen, let's be honest here. I don't know what your background is as far as you grew up with a mother, father, anything like that, and stuff like that. But I'm gonna tell you right now, me growing up, besides my grandmother, I knew that no one cared. If no one cares, then you have to care about yourself. So as time went on, as I started becoming older, and I realized, wow, you are in this on your own, which was probably about 14, 15, when you're walking around with holes in your sneakers and your grandmother got to go on welfare because, she knows you need stuff. And then she was crying over welfare check one time. And I mean, just stuff like that. But anyway, at a point when I was able to make my own money, I just started working. Now, as far as circumstances, in my mind, I will not give all these people in life that have left me to fail, that abandoned me, because that's what you did in life. I will not give you the pleasure to say that I failed. Wow. My revenge, and I hate to use that word, but guess what? It's true. My revenge to all those people that ever did me wrong in life is massive success. It's not massive success necessarily in the entertainment field or the publishing field. I'm talking about in life. I haven't been in jail, never been arrested. I have a family. My daughters were always protected. My wife, I have a wife that I've been with for almost 40 years. I have a beautiful home. I have a life. I did that. God did that, but I did that. I got out of the ghetto. You can go to the ghetto right now and have people my age who've been there all of their life. We call that, when I was growing up, ghetto fabulous. People can get out the ghetto, but in their mindset, as long as they living a little bit better than the people in the ghetto, they think they've made it. Oh, I can drive. I got a better car than so and so. We get. How should I say? Poor people. If they have their materialistic things, give them value. And sometimes they walk around the ghetto with designer clothes and jewelry so they can show everybody how much money they have and to get robbed for it. But this is the mentality. Instead of taking that money that you may have made and maybe buy a piece of real estate and buy a home and have an asset and take that money and parlay it into something else, live like to grow, to get out of it. They don't have that mentality. They don't have that because whoever raised them or whatever what's going on made that lifestyle okay. They said, they showed the example. They said the mother, like, and I don't want any controversy, but I'm going to always speak the truth. When we have generational mothers on welfare, you got the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter with carrying her newborn baby going to the welfare office. And that just doesn't happen in the big cities. That happens in these little towns too. Mm-hmm. So I never wanted to give people the pleasure of seeing me fail. And through my life, there was a lot of challenges and there was a lot of times I did fail. But what made me get back up again was one, like I told you before, nobody cared. Nobody cares if you fail, but yourself. So I failed a lot of times, but I knew I only had myself and my wife, I say, because without her, I would have really been, in the doghouse. But I had to pick myself up and just start looking forward. You can't look back now. I had a point I started realizing you can't look back because nobody's going to do anything for you except yourself. In the end, you are responsible no matter what has happened to you in life. You are going to be responsible for what happens to you in your future. Your decision making. Because let's face it, in life, in relationships, anything that we go through, really, it's our decision making that puts us in any situation that we're in. It's just what develops our decision making. And you can read all about that in my book. Did I tell you I had a book out there? Available on Amazon. But anyway, yes. I mean, did I answer the question? I don't want to start
you did. You did.
Rambling with you and stuff.
No. Like, and if I'm quiet, it's because I'm just so fascinated and really sinking in everything that you're saying. Because I feel like so many people take on, and it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. I think rich, poor, whatever you've been through, it's very easy to take this victim mentality or say, I can't, this is what life handed me, or this is so horrible, or, poor me. And you didn't let that define you. You pushed and you said, I'm going to care about myself. I'm going to pull myself up. I'm going to show my way of being successful is showing my family that I didn't let anything that was put in my way stop me. And I think that's such a powerful message that you have. And so I'm just captivated by listening to you talk about that. But what I do want to let you do too is not only have you written one book, you've written a series of books. So would you tell people a little bit more about how this is developed as a series?
Well, book one, Ghetto Bastard, available on Amazon. You can go to ghettobastard.com. Well, first, let me tell you, on ghettobastard.com, there's a little television there. If you click on it, it'll read the first chapter for you. All right. So the first book talks about my upbringing, how I came to be into the situation I was with my great grandmother, how I grew up in the South Bronx, and like I said before, about the outside influences and the decisions that I made and the mistakes that I made in life, and it's just setting the foundation, humanizing, should I say, the Ghetto Bastard? Because like I said, the first time people see the book, they're going, what's that? But then when they start to read it, they'll understand it's a story about life. So the first one sets the foundation. It humanizes, like I said, not being a statistic, someone that comes from the ghetto, a bastard child, abandoned by his mother and father and grandparents and left to the world. The second book brings the downfall and the rebuilding and the growing and the using that moral integrity. And it's also, like I said before, the book is also a love story. So it speaks about my wife and I being young, 15 and 16, and the things that we had to go through, because I mean, let's be honest. I'm from the ghetto at 15, and no man to teach me how to be a man and how to respect a woman. I wasn't the best. And so it speaks about that relationship and having to part and separate for a time, and then that getting back together and resuming that trust and that love and that foundation again. This is book 2 that I'm talking about, and growing, and her coming to my side when I was at the bottom of everything, where nobody. If I was at the bottom when I was born, I was at the bottom when I was about 26, and here she came and rescued me again. So the book is also a love story. And then book 2 is this book 2, and book 3 is called Life After Death. Ghetto Bastard, Life After Death. And that brings it all together. And I think it's beautiful. And next I'll be writing Ghetto Bastard 4, which I'm in the process of doing that now. And it's going to be called The American Dream. So it's going to bring it all together, from being born in the Mott Haven section of the South Bronx to surviving through the 60s, the 70s, the 70s heroin epidemic, the 80s crack epidemic, the 90s AIDS epidemic, and surviving all of that to the point that I am now. And it brings it all full circle, book 4. So it's called The American Dream, this is the American Dream. Look at that. I'm sitting here talking to you, Ghetto Bastard from South Bronx. Right? And book 5, because I'm going to do a 6-book series. Book 5 is going to be called Godly Man, because I'm going to take all of the books and look at all of the decisions that I've made, good and bad, and see now as an older man, as a more spiritual man, the different decisions I could have made spiritually to grow, or how those things in life made me grow spiritually. So that's going to be number 5. And then number 6 will be the last one. That'll be my first novel, in a sense, because everything else is a memoir, is going to be called What If? And that's when I'm going to take all of that information and everything I have in life, and I'm going to make it, the what if is going to be, what if I made all of the wrong decisions? What would have been the outcome? What if my mother and father, my mother or my father, either one I had grew up with, that I
so it's an alternative history, essentially, of your life. The alternative history
yes,
of what your life could have been.
Listen, and in my mind, I've been working on it for a couple of years now. Why? Because that's how writers do. You're working on one thing, but your mind is always in something else. When you're, so yes, an alternative life, and that'll be. I think that'll be my biggest challenge. But I think I'm going to get such fulfillment out of it, because sometimes I look at things and say, "Man, if I," so that'll be next. So that's my series.
I love it. I really love it. And let me ask you, what do you hope, if there was let's say a young man who had lived a similar life to yours, and he were to pick up your book and read the series, what do you hope is the ultimate message they would get out of that?
The ultimate message to me out of my book, and you have to read it, and I don't want anyone to think it's like a religious book, but God has to be first, because when you're alone and the world done stomped on you and you got nobody, it's just you and God. Upon that, you will always grow. Your mindset is going to change. I want them to look at that book and say, wow, I'm not the only one. Wow, hey, this guy went through this. Because no matter what goes on in life, there's always somebody that can say they had something worse. I'm going to give you an example. Spoiler in the book. I was molested. I could say raped. I wasn't molested. I was raped when I was 14 for several months. But I was raped at 14 for several months by a woman.
That's
So,
interesting.
so in my mind, it wasn't rape. It wasn't child
Mhm.
molestation. I was getting some. I was
Mhm.
14. I was going to school, and I thought I was grown, but I shouldn't have been put in that position. That shouldn't have been my mentality. My
Yeah.
mentality. In the reality, I was raped. I just liked it because I was a 14-year-old, but I was being taken advantage of by a 27-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, reverse that. I said to you, I could have been raped at 14 for several months by a man. They're both rape.
Yeah.
It's both an adult taking advantage of an immature minor, So,
Yeah.
but never give up. What I say, just different situations in life, and I hope that they can sit back and they can read that book and they can be like, wow, okay. And I hope that they can look at the book and say, wow, it's about making good decisions. You don't have to do that. You don't have to give in to peer pressure. No matter what's going on around you, you don't have to give into that. Keep your life on focus, because anything that goes on in life, in the end, you're the one that's going to have to deal with the consequences.
And
All the
that's
decisions you make, you're going to have to deal with the consequences.
And that's so powerful. I feel like so many times when I talk to young people, their biggest thing is they always think that they're alone, that they're the only one who's ever experienced what they're going through, or that other people haven't experienced. And I think for so long it's because a lot of what sounds like is in your book are things that you didn't necessarily talk about out loud. And so I think that there's so much power behind the fact that you have put it into words, essentially everything that you've been through, and how people can now see that they're not alone in some of the things that they've had to experience and go through. So I just, there isn't a question here as much as I just want to keep praising how amazing you are and how
Oh, I'm not
impactful and
amazing. Oh,
important I think.
please.
No, but I mean, I feel like that's so impactful because we don't necessarily talk about these things. The things that are hard, the things that are ugly, the things that, don't feel great that we went through, but it's so powerful when we do talk about it because there are other people going through these things, and I think it's important for people not to feel alone. And so I thank you for putting those things into words so that other people can connect and realize that exactly what you're essentially trying to accomplish is that my circumstances don't define my life and what I am capable of achieving in the long run.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I truly, truly believe that. And so you said that you can access your books on Amazon. Are there anywhere else? Where are all the things that if people want to know more about you or get to know you
Well,
or find
like I
you?
said, you can get it on Amazon because just Russell Vann. Go to ghettobastard.com. I encourage everyone to do that. Go to ghettobastard.com. And like I said, there's a little television on there, and click on the television, and it's going to read that first chapter to you. I don't think they'll once they get through the first chapter, they're not going to be able to put the book down, because it starts off a child being abused,
Mm.
and which is the earliest memory. So ghettobastard.com, and you get a lot of information and everything that you just said. You'll get all of that off of ghettobastard.com, and you can go to Amazon. You can pick up Ghetto Bastard, Ghetto Bastard 2, and Ghetto Bastard 3, Life After Death. And I'm not going to give the spoiler of why I named it Life After Death, but at the ending of book 2, you'll understand. Oh, okay. So,
So
and
when
ebooks as well.
and when can we expect the fourth one? When is that coming out?
You know what's so funny? I've wrote about 50 pages, and I got a little bit of that writer's block because I'm still thinking of what if, and I'm
Mhm.
going back and forth because it's one of those things. I don't know what's the word for it, but when it happens, it's going to be like pulling a trigger.
Yep.
But it seems like I'm sitting around with my wife sometimes, and I watch the TV. I do a lot of YouTube University stuff, and it looks like I'm not doing anything. I tell her, or my daughter will come and say hi, but my mind is going 1,000 miles a minute. I'm absorbing everything. I'm getting new information. I'm trying to put everything together, and the book is part of that. It's in that cyclone there. So I'm hoping within the year that it'll be done, and I'll be starting Godly Man
Mhm.
also, because what's fortunate is the American dream is just recalling information. It's just how I want to put that information, because a lot of things transpired after the time frame that I was going to end the book that I think should be included. So so within the year, I'm hoping to get that out and get that published. So, and hopefully I get a nice little fan base, a little more fan base, so they'll demand for it to be released and put some fire to me, and I'll be, oh, they're demanding for it to be released. That's what. And I'm also possibly looking into having a screenplay written about it. In contact with some people, but if you think the ghetto's treacherous, them Hollywood people, they treacherous too. So
yeah, I've heard that.
Not Hollywood people, entertainment industry is treacherous within itself too. So I have to sit back, and what's funny is use all my, should I say, ghetto wisdom when I'm dealing with these hustlers per se, and just understand because one thing I've learned also, I should put this into with young people: never let people truly know what you think, and never let people truly know what you feel. That's what I would tell young people. Keep that to yourself, because go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because that's a good transition, because one of the things I always ask all of my guests, and usually towards the end of the show, is if you had advice for any youth, young adult, usually if they're struggling social emotionally, but I'm going to let you roll on just what your advice is in general for young adults.
Don't let people know what you truly think or how you truly feel. Now, if you got a soulmate, you got a wife, y'all having that little pillow talk, that's who you tell that to. The outside world, they're only going to use it against you. Everyone wears masks. Whoever you're dealing with in life, in different situations, that we all wear masks. But what people tend to do is use other people. So if people know what you're thinking, they're going to use it against you. If people know how you're feeling, they're going to use it against you. I always go by the motto, I'm going to give you my C game when I'm dealing with certain people. C game is, C plus or whatever. That's the type you're going to get from me. Because then if someone's trying to take advantage of me, because I'm always testing people's character, they're going to come to me, they're going to come at me with their B game. Now, when you come with your B game, then I'm going to come at you with my A game. And I'm going to be ahead of you, because you ain't going to get a chance to get back at me to get an A plus. You know what I mean? So
I like that.
That's that thinking. That's just that growing up thinking, always on the defense, always wondering how, and it's a self-preservation mode. But that's what I would recommend. Now, that doesn't mean bottle up your feelings.
Right.
Don't express yourself, but then there's a time and a place. And if one more thing I would emphasize to young people, and I know this is going to sound a little crazy and cliche and stuff like that, but find yourself a mate. 2 is always better than 1. When 2 people, and there's a part in book 2 that it starts off and it talks about love, and that true love only comes in pairs. Not one person is in love and the other person is obsessed and all of that nonsense. But to truly find someone to go through this world with and give as much love as you're receiving and more, because it's hard out here.
Yeah.
It's hard out here in this world, especially alone. And one of the things that I'm very grateful for is to have a partner, to have someone in the relationship. I was looking at am I taking too long to this? I know it was going into something else. And I didn't
go for it. I love listening to what you have to say.
I was looking at a program, and it was talking about older people, whether 50s and above, let's say 55 and 60s and above, who didn't have companions, either through maybe death or just breaking up, divorce. And a lot of people were saying, they weren't talking about sex, a couple of people, but nonsense. But they were talking about being lonely, being out here and feeling like they didn't have anyone that they can come home to at night and talk to and get what they had, just that safe place.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there saying to myself, wow, like I take that for granted because I have that. You know, my wife and I, we sit down and it's we call it pillow talk because we sitting down and what goes on in this between this pillow is nobody's business, especially a lot of times like my oldest daughter, she's 31 and she remembers growing up and she would hear us. She goes, I remember y'all whispering in the room. We wasn't whispering, we just talking. You know what I mean? What about you? But anyway, you know, and what happens also is when you have a spouse, mate, and you're talking about your children, a lot of times if those children heard what you were saying about them, they wouldn't want to talk to you anymore. But you have to, but the significance, and when I'm talking to young people, of having someone in your corner by your side, ride or die, is I am a human being. So my thinking is not perfection. I need to be able to bounce off what I'm thinking off of somebody else who's going to be straight with me, open with me, and tell me if I'm wrong or right and say, that doesn't sound good, blah, blah, blah. Because if I'm left to my own devices, I'm going to make a lot more mistakes. Whereas if it's two of us thinking against a situation, then it's going to be a little more balance in the decisions in balance. So I mean, if I could just say it, that was God, my upbringing by my great grandmother, moral values, and my spouse. You know, that's what defines me. That's what makes me, because those things cannot be bought. Those relationships have to be earned. They're relationships that grow, that you build on. I build on my spiritual relationship with God. That relationship with my grandmother was built from when I was 4 years old and she was my savior. I mean, she's dead now, but that relation, but it continues because, like I said, that moral integrity that she has instilled inside of me. That relationship with my wife since I was 15 years old, all the heartache, all the stress, all the pain, all the betrayals on my part, you know, that I put forth. And yet we're all together and we're bonding. And I know that this person is not here to hurt me. This person is here for well-being, and we're both on the same page. So our goals are that we're growing together. So if I could wish that on anybody, not wealth, you know, people say, what would you wish for in life? I don't know, maybe I'm getting old now, but a lot of people say, what if you wish for something, or what would you wish for? I wish for good health and safety. You can keep the money. It's going to come anyway. But all of that doesn't mean anything if I'm not healthy.
Yeah.
All of that doesn't mean anything if I'm not safe. You know? So those are just the things I would say to young people. But unfortunately, we are in a society as of now that if I say something like what I'm just telling you now, they'll look at me like I'm crazy. No. Because the media, the music industry, they have the ear of the young people.
Yeah.
And that's how they corrupt the system, is through the music and the entertainment. Because I was looking at something the other day in the place that I work. I was talking to these juveniles, and they talking crazy as young people would be. But actually, I was talking to juveniles who were murderers.
Oh, man.
I was in there, 3 guys that were murderers, but they still kids for some reason.
Yeah.
And I was talking to them. They're trying to talk to me about rappers and all of that, and I really didn't want to hear it. But I did say something. I said, you know, fellas. I said, I understand the corruption of your mind. And they were looking at me like I'm crazy, of course. I said, because I was looking at a music video the other day. It came across on the YouTube. And it had these Megan Thee Stallion, a Doja Cat, a Nicki Minaj, and somebody else. And what they were doing on those videos, I was flabbergasted.
Oh man, I can only imagine. I haven't seen one of their recent music videos, but I can only imagine, especially given what some of the lyrics are. in the
I
song.
was flabbergasted. And I said, this is what the young women of today are looking at.
Yeah.
This is what the young men of today are looking at women in general. And this is why they're sexualizing them.
It doesn't it seem kind of counterintuitive a little bit, the
Yes.
fact that there's this big movement, right, of especially women not wanting to be seen a certain way or be treated a certain way, but then our music doesn't seem to reflect that.
Well, I think there's always a double-edged sword on both because let me tell you, and just to show you something here, you know, these activists, I don't want to be getting no protests, but I'm gonna say what I gotta say. I say I'm only gonna speak the truth. You know, a lot of activists and a lot of things go on, but in the places where they should start, I don't see any activism.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you an example. Why don't I see marches every week in Chicago?
Mm-hmm.
When there were 2,000, 3,000 people getting killed, why wasn't I seeing marches in those neighborhoods?
Yeah.
Why wasn't I seeing attention brought to that? Here, just like I said at the beginning of our conversation, because the people in those environments become statistics. They're not humanized.
Yeah.
When one person gets killed, it's a tragedy. Oh, Bobby died. Blah, 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 blah. When a mass number of people die, it's a statistic.
Yeah.
So you can tell me 2,000 people got killed. I don't know what the statistic. So I'm just putting that number because I know I heard it one time that it was. It's probably more. Okay. But that 2,000 people died, but you don't know those 2,000 people's names. It's just 2,000 people died in Chicago through gun violence.
Yeah.
So we're all the marches. We're all the signs. We're all the, without saying anybody's particular organization, but where's all of that? So I look at that the same way with the feminists when they're talking about they want men to see them a certain way or the me whatever movement, blah, blah, blah. But yet you're not ostracizing these women that are sitting up here half naked on TVs, rubbing all on each other. And I think we spoke before when I said, and the media is promoting this because at one time the top Billboard song was that WAP, which I think you know what that stands for, and I'm not going to repeat it. But the mere fact that that is what was the head on top of the billboards is what they're promoting, which is what our children are watching, which is instilling that integrity, that moral integrity, which is making them make the decisions that they're making. People aren't addressing that.
No.
And I'm a ghetto bastard. I'm not I'm not a rocket scientist, and I can see that. So to me, all of these organizations are fake until you go, and a lot of times it's easy to challenge things that are easy.
Well, Russell, I want to thank you for coming on the show, for sharing your story, for being, to me, the powerful being that you are, and being open and honest with people about things that you've gone through. And I truly hope that to my listeners, get the book, Ghetto Bastard. You've got 3 to get started on. There's 3
By
more
Russell
coming.
Vann. Russell Vann.
And truly, I hope that you find the inspiration that I find in Russell, because really, I think your story of perseverance is really an amazing one. And thank you for coming on and sharing it with others. I truly appreciate your time
Thank
today.
you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you to all my listeners for tuning in. I appreciate having you here, and I look forward to seeing you next week on the Neurodiverse Teacher podcast.